Steve Kennedy, acquisitions editor for the AMS MAA book program. I'm co-moderating today's panel with my colleague, Eriko Hironaka, who's similarly an acquisitions editor for the book programs of the two societies. We're here to have a discussion of the experience of publishing a book with the two in the joint program of the two societies, the AMS and the MAA. This is the second of three such discussions. Yesterday's discussion focused on graduate textbooks and research monographs. Tomorrow, at this same time, there's a discussion about publishing books of general interest and whose purpose is outreach. Today, though, we're going to talk about books for undergraduates, particularly but not exclusively undergraduate textbooks. And we're joined by the distinguished authors of four AMS and MAA books, Anne Noonburg, Harriet Pollatsek, Michael Starbird, and Martin Weissman. We're going to ask the panelists sequentially to talk about the experience of the genesis of their book, why they wrote it, what the process was of producing it. And I'm going to start with Anne. Anne Noonburg is an alumnus of all of her degrees, I think, are from Cornell University. She had a 40-year teaching career at the University of Hartford. Anne was an early adopter of computer experimentation in the teaching of undergraduate differential equations. And I suspect at least, that informed her vision for her beautiful book, Differential Equations from Calculus to Dynamical Systems. And I hope you can talk for a minute or two about your vision for the undergraduate differential equations course, how your book serves that vision, and how you came to write that book.
Okay, well, I was teaching at the University of Hartford, which is a teaching institution where you teach 3 courses a term and summer school, and no hope of writing or doing research. And I saw an opportunity to go back as a visiting professor at Cornell for a year on a sabbatical. And that's where I met Beverly West and John Hubbard, who were writing a really exciting differential equations book, I thought. And I got the bug to write my own differential equations book at that time. But that was back in the 1990s. And I didn't really, when I went back to University of Hartford, I didn't have the time to do very much, but I kept collecting the notes for a book. And so when I retired in 2011, I sat down and decided what I wanted to do. And what I wanted to do was write a book that would be accessible not only to engineers, who were the sole students in my course, but also to other STEM majors like biologists and those who were going into medicine, because I thought this was what was going to happen in the next few years. We're going to see differential equations in all of those subjects. So I tried to write a book that was mathematically sound, covered everything that the engineers wanted, and also included a lot of problems that would interest the biology majors. At the same time, my son had started teaching biology at Florida Atlantic University, and he had a lot of trouble with the biology students not knowing even calculus, let alone differential equations, and yet he had to teach them. So that gave me another incentive to include a lot of biological problems in the book.
Thank you. I neglected to say attendees should see a Q&A button at the bottom of their screen. If at any time you have a question, please just type it in the Q&A window, and we'll monitor that window and pose them to the appropriate panelist. Eriko?
Yes, so next I'd like to introduce Harriet Pollatsek. She also received her higher degrees from one place, University of Michigan. She taught at Mount Holyoke College for many years, where she is now emeritus professor. Her specialties are in algebra and combinatorics, and she has a long record of support of and advocacy for undergraduate research. For the latter work, she received the Louise Hay Award in 2008 from the Association of Women in Mathematics. Harriet has published 2 books with AMS MAA, the MAA textbook, Lie Groups, A Problem-Oriented Introduction via Matrix Groups, and the AMS series, Student Math Library series, with the title Difference Sets, Connecting Algebra, Combinatorics, and Geometry, co-written with Emily Moore. Harriet, so on your webpage, it states that you enjoy making mathematics contagious. Please tell us about how your approach to supervising undergraduate research and how your teaching philosophy is reflected in your textbooks.
Well, one of the hard lessons I learned in writing my Lee Group's book, most of which grew out of many iterations of material for students to read, the introductory chapter was meant to capture the way I winged it at the beginning with them in person to get them interested and excited. And it turns out that that doesn't translate very well to paper. And it was terrible on the first iteration. And it was one of the reviewers, actually, who pointed me in a direction to salvage it in some way. But the contagiousness part is my belief that nobody catches anything by passively watching, so that it requires active engagement to get infected. Of my two books, I think the Lee Groups was probably a scenario that's familiar. I had a course I wanted to teach. I had a way, I tried to make it happen. There were no existing materials. So over the years, scattered notes became gradually more coherent. The origin of the Different Sets book was quite different. That actually grew out of undergraduate research projects that Emily Moore and I had done, where we each had to do some prepping at the beginning to get people up to speed to read the research literature. And it was Emily's idea that just for ourselves, just for fun, we should try to write something. We actually never dreamed that somebody would really publish it, but we had a terrific time writing it.
So that's something that we'll follow up on, is the writing process, and it's really great to hear someone talking about how it was a great, fun time, because not everybody says that about writing. So Steve will introduce the next person.
Mike. Michael Starbird is a distinguished teaching professor at the University of Texas at Austin. Mike's training and mathematical specialty is in topology. He's perhaps best known in this community for his decades-long advocacy for inquiry-based learning and teaching in mathematics. And more recently, actually, he's become something of an evangelist for the idea that mathematics teaches effective thinking principles that can be used throughout a student's life, throughout person's life. Mike's written 3 books for the MAA, Number Theory Through Inquiry with David Marshall and Ted Odell, Distilling Ideas, which is an intro to proof course with Brian Katz, and Topology Through Inquiry, most recently Topology Through Inquiry with Francis Su. So I suspect Michael might have something to say about having co-authors, having had so many of them. But Mike has a strong vision for how mathematics should be taught and communicated. And I'm hoping that's obviously being implemented in his books. And I'm hoping that you can talk something about that as you talk about how these books came to be.
Yes, well, well, thanks so much for including me on this panel. It's such a pleasure to be with you all. One of the things that I like to think I try to do is to get people to think for themselves and to be able to produce new ideas and to see mathematics as something that they can actually create rather than just learn from somebody else who knows it. And as Harriet pointed out in her talk about her books, you know, it's just obvious that people who are engaged with the mathematics, actually doing the things, that's what makes mathematics fun. To me, in fact, to be honest, I really don't like to go to math lectures, you know, where people just tell you how to do something. I don't get much out of that. I like it when people pose a question and then I have to go and really work on it. And I like to try to promote that theme. Now, one of the things I like to do is get people to understand things, and being, you know, quantitatively literate is something that, of course, all of us in the world outside of our own professions, we realize the significance of that and the need for that. And so, for example, when Steve, in your introduction, you said there are 4 books represented, published by the AMS among our group. Well, if I count correctly, let's see, Harriet has 2, I have 3, Anne has 1, and Marty has, who knows? We don't know yet. I mean, maybe 10. So, you know, I'm up to at least 6. And so I don't know what this 4 is about.
Right.
You know, so, yeah, okay. So I'm just saying. So to me, my goal was to write books that had the property that the students who were engaging with the books would be most of the time engaging with producing mathematics on their own. And that has the effect that the books like this one, this is the number theory book, look how thin it is. You see, there's almost, it's very thin. And the reason for that is there are no proofs in there. You see, so, and of course it makes it much shorter to write because you don't write the proofs. Of course, I don't even know how to do most of the proofs. You know, who's to say if they're even true? But anyway, so it makes the books promoting a method of teaching. Namely, that the idea is that a student or a faculty member engaged with the book would just tell the student, okay, you personally try to prove the following things or do the following exercises. And then that leads the student to discover ideas and hopefully have these aha moment of mathematical discovery, which is so, talking about infection, as Harriet's pointed out, and Anne was talking about using biological relationships with differential equations, you know, having this idea of infecting students with the joy of thinking, it seems to me to be a great goal. And so I have really enjoyed writing these books, and all of them came from my own teaching of classes in this style. And then over the years, you know, I refined the sequence of challenges so that the students really have the right levels of difficulty to just be able to do that next thing and therefore see the new idea and have that joy. And that comes from iterations of actually teaching with students. So to me, thinking about what the audience is, namely the students who are going to be engaged with the book, is one of the keys that I like to think about when I'm working on things. And as you say, I've always worked with co-authors, and I just enjoy, I like people and I like to really work with others. So to me, it would be very difficult to write a book just by myself.
Thanks, Mike. Echo?
Okay, so Marty Weissman received his bachelor's degree in mathematics at Princeton University and a doctorate at Harvard University. He's currently a professor of mathematics at the University of California, Santa Cruz. In addition to an active research program in number theory, representation theory, and geometry, Marty has developed innovative methods in mathematical exposition, particularly in the realm of visualization. So we've talked about sort of the, you know, talking about working with students and having a kind of idea of how to make mathematics attractive through the process of working through a problem and then having that come out in a book. And this is yet another level where visualization is one of the key tools of engaging students. And I'd love to hear more about that. In 2020, Marty received a Guggenheim Fellowship to support his continued work on helping people see prime numbers. Another aspect of this is that you think of visualization in geometry and topology. You know, here it is in number theory, which is also exciting. In 2018, he published with the AMS a book, An Illustrated Theory of Numbers. that captures these ideas. Let's see, you have written that you seek to create images that convey not just mathematical form, but also a mathematical narrative. Please tell us more about how you think images and stories connect to effective teaching and learning, and how you were able to manifest this in your book.
Thank you, Echo. So there's something in common, I think, with all the other panelists, at least among all us four, is that we started with from kind of teaching to writing. So maybe this is because this is the textbook panel. And with number theory, when I started studying mathematics, I didn't like number theory at all, because I think I had been exposed to a lot of kind of contest problems, and it always seemed like kind of a weird bag of tricks. It was never really so attractive to me. But I got interested as an undergraduate when I took courses that explained some parallels between number theory and geometry, specifically Riemann surfaces and number fields. And that was really kind of hooked by this whole mysterious connection, and how for every theorem in one field, there seemed to be another theorem in the other field. So I kind of came into number theory from that perspective, and then started teaching number theory, well, first as a TA for elementary number theory classes, then as a postdoc, and then as a professor at Santa Cruz, and also in some summer programs for high school students, which are more kind of inquiry-based learning experiences through number theory. And I think that through these, I kind of, it started feeling like I had my own approach to it after maybe 10 years or 12 years or something of this kind of teaching. And I think that by itself might not have led me to write a book, because there are so many number theory books out there. So I felt like I had ownership of it to teach it in my own sort of style, maybe not to write on it. But at the same time, I had gotten into design as kind of a hobby, and maybe a little bit too much into design and visualization. So I started looking into this, the data visualization side, but I didn't really have much data to visualize of my own. So I started to make kind of graphics to go along with my teaching. My board work isn't that great, but I started writing course notes with more and more pictures in them. And eventually those turned into the book, The Illustrated Theory of Numbers, which I published with the AMS. I think that, it is really difficult to convey an in-class activity in a book form. So there's a little bit of that in my book. For example, when I teach Euclidean algorithm, I do this little hop and skip game or something. And that's really an in-class activity that became a page or two in the textbook. But most of the activities didn't exactly translate, but the pictures did. So as long as I sort of drew the pictures nicely, it was kind of another route into the material. And my hope is that by using kind of this illustrated approach, that some of my love of number theory, which really comes from the geometry side, gets transmitted to the students as well. So even though there are kind of a mixture of techniques that go into proving number theory theorems, maybe having some geometric insight and some visual insight allows the students to kind of fall in love with the subject in the same way that I did. Let's see, I think that might be, yeah, I've taken my 5 minutes, so I think that's good for now. I'll save more for later.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks, Marty. So I actually firmly believe that all of us, every mathematician, has somewhere deep inside them, or maybe not even so deep, a book, at least one book. But we promised in the advertisement for this session that we would provide some nuts and bolts information about how one goes from that interior, inchoate conception of, I have this piece of mathematics that I want to communicate, to actually holding a printed book in your hand. And in particular, doing that work with one of the societies. So I'm hoping that you guys can tell us a little about how you went from, you've got a big pile of notes, to actually holding in your hand a book. Talk about the reviewing process, the editing process, the production process. And I'm going to start with you, Mike, because you picked up.
Okay. Well, I'm delighted to talk about the writing process. So at this point, I've written several books, 3 of them for the MAA, and then some other books for others. And I think I've gotten better in the writing process as time has gone on. Part of it is this, that when I was first starting this writing business, an editor would write a criticism on something, and it would say, "Oh, this is no good. You should change this." And And I would be offended, and I'd say, well, wait a minute, look at the third sentence of paragraph 4. That's, I say exactly what you say. And then finally, it dawned on me that when you get a criticism from an editor or somebody, it's not that that what they're doing is they're pointing out that their reaction to the book did not correspond to what I had hoped their reaction would be. Often when a person who, like an editor, makes a comment, they have a suggestion. And in my experience, often I don't like the suggestions they make, but I always interpret the criticism as an indication that something should be changed. For example, and I'll give you an example of, and so there are certain kinds of editing that that I think is, comments, and how do you respond to the comments? In some cases, in the case of working with the MAA and AMS, in some cases, the comments, they're really quite nice about it. They'll say, it's your book, you do what you should say. We suggest such and such, but you might change it. And often their comments are very helpful, and I do actually make changes. But occasionally there'll be something that I don't agree with. For example, I'll give you an example. This is in my topology book. The topology book is a lot thicker because I know more topology. This is, in any case, but one thing that we had in the book is this. And I'll hold it up. You can just see there are these things called effective thinking principles that we have in here. And so as we go through the book, they have these box things called effective thinking principle. This one, for example, is draw a picture. And it says part of the value of drawing a picture is to see features in your picture that you did not intentionally put there. See, now I consider that a deep insight. That you draw a picture not just to say what you had in your head, but what's there that you didn't put there. You see, and then that's the one great reason for drawing pictures and things. So we have these thinking experiences because I view one of the main goals of this book is to help people learn to think beyond the mathematics that's in the book. It has nothing to do with the topology or the number theory, or it has to do with how are you going to think in everyday life. And to me, that's one of the important goals of the book. Whereas the editor, if they're thinking, oh, it's a topology book, that doesn't sound like topology to me. Let's get less of that. It just sort of gets in the way. Well, that's an example of an editorial kind of comment where it encouraged me to make more clear the goal of the book. So in the introduction to the book, we put more comments to the potential instructor saying, we really feel that the goal of the book goes well beyond just the mathematical content. I have one very specific, you asked for nuts and bolts, and I have one very specific one. If you get nothing else out of this hour, this will help you, which is this. After you've written either a book or an article, read it out loud. Every book I've written, what we do near the end, after it's all written, we read the book out loud, word for word, every single word, the entire thing. And better to have a person read it who isn't the person who wrote it. Because what happens is when you read it out loud, if you stumble over a sentence, that means that sentence was not phrased as clearly as you could. So I strongly recommend reading things out loud. The other thing I recommend is that you have people read the book who are the target audience. Having your colleagues read a math book is fine because they'll say, oh yeah, that math is perfect, exactly right. But that's not who the audience is. If your audience is a student, make sure that students are people who are also being the ones who are reading the drafts of the book. So those are two practical kinds of suggestions.
So I assume that's why you write those skinny books, if you're going to read them entirely out loud as soon as you're done, if you want to read the book.
Exactly.
That's why you wrote Echo, I think I'm going to pass it over to you.
Okay. Yeah. So Marty, your book is true to its title, contains a lot of illustrations in addition to the mathematics, and so it seems like one would imagine that it was technically, a challenge to produce. How did that go, and how was the writing process, and how was also the production process and your interactions with the publishers? Oh, you're sorry.
I did it. Almost muted. So that's right. So I really started writing the book before contacting publishers. It was a course pack sort of beforehand. And I was influenced by Edward Tufte, who's kind of a classic now in visualization. And there's a LaTeX package called Tufte LaTeX for a large page layout with side notes instead of footnotes and various other features that I like. I used Tixi for graphics. And I was very picky about things like 2-page spreads. So when you open the book, there's a page on the left and a page on the right. And I wanted to control what was on the left, what was on the right, so that they interacted with each other. The program for graphics, since I see it in the chat, is called Tixi, T-I-K-Z. So pretty much all the graphics that I made, they were produced in Tixi, sometimes with some Python scripts to make Tixi code and other little tricks like that. So yeah, the production took a long time for me. I mean, I kind of thought of it as a series of 2-page spreads. So if you open the book to these 2 pages, what's going to be there? So that involves making sure my paragraphs end exactly at the right place, things like that. So that very unusual kind of things, I guess, for writing a math book. When I was looking at publishing, because I hadn't really been through this game before, I approached a couple of publishers and friends. So I talked to Ken Ribbett, for example, because, well, obviously he's been involved in the AMS quite a bit, as well as with Springer as publishers. I talked to people with Princeton University Press. I like AMS for a couple of reasons. First is that they seem to understand the vision of the book, which was a little bit unusual. I was very fussy about things like the size of the paper and the weight of the paper, and that it be printed hardcover and in color and other nonsense like that most other publishers wouldn't really be so enthusiastic about it. Such a fussy author. And as a nonprofit, I was confident that I could do things at a price that was reasonable. I didn't want to publish a book that was $120, $150. Its list price is $70 and is on sale for $50 or so. So those things were very appealing to me because the AMS's mission is to serve the mathematical community. And I wanted the book to be appreciated by the mathematical community as well. So those are my priorities. In terms of working with the AMS, it was delightful. I mean, I can't remember if Sergey is the first person I talked to, but I certainly spoke with Sergey the most throughout the process. And I got a lot of good feedback from the people who read the book. They caught various writing tics that I have and other things that improved the writing throughout the book. What else? Yes, that's about all that I can think of. I wish I had followed Michael's advice to read it out loud from beginning to end. It certainly got a lot of read-throughs, but one thing that I found is that as I edited the book, I introduced more mistakes as I went. And so one thing that would have been great is if, when it was really final, I'd just done a read-through kind of word by word through the entire thing. And that probably would have been like a last bit of improvement rather than shuffling things around and introducing new mistakes along the way. So I've taken notes on that one.
Okay, Steve?
I don't want to too blatantly blow the AMS and MAA horn, but we do see ourselves as providing a service to the community and therefore having sort of a different motivation than other publishers. I mean, we are mathematicians trying to share books with our colleagues, not trying to make money. So I appreciate what Marty said about the sort of community-minded mission of the MAA and the AMS, which we all feel as we produce these books. So I'm going to turn to Anne, and I'm going to ask Anne to talk about her experience of actually, since we're talking about how the AMS and the MAA do business, how that experience went of working with the AMS and the MAA of producing your textbook.
I had a wonderful experience with the AMS, MAA, both. And I think they actually made my book a lot better than the manuscript I sent in initially, and partly due to you. And I think that working with the mathematical societies to publish a book, if you're writing a math book, it's the only way to go. I mean, it keeps the cost of the book down. so that students don't have to pay a fortune for it, which is a good thing. And the editorial board are all mathematicians. They can read your book and actually pick out things that you have not done too well. As a matter of fact, when I submitted my book, uh, I was told that there were some things that were lacking, and I went back and looked, and I agreed with them. I mean, I actually added some things that they suggested. So I think that anybody who wants to write a book in mathematics should think about the MAA MS first. Also, I want to say that I used Tech and Maple, and I used Maple for figures, and a lot of people are not aware of Maple very much, but I had a wonderful, let's see, Beverly Rudai, back when the MAA was in the business by themselves, practically took my graphs and made them into something beautiful. So I want to say that working with this group has been tremendous.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Echo?
Harriet, so you've also worked with both the MAA and AMS editorial groups. What made you decide on one versus the other? I mean, how did that work out in terms of choosing not just the society, I guess, but also the kind of series that your books appeared in? How did that affect your writing?
In the case of the Lee groups, actually, Don Albers approached me after I won the award from the AWM. He said, "Hey, are you writing a book?" And I said, "No, I don't think so." "Well, I've got these Lee groups notes." And one thing I wanted to emphasize about the working with the professional societies, Lee groups is not an undergraduate course. A commercial publisher has no interest, I'm sure, in a text for a course that more or less doesn't exist. But that was never an issue. The point was, can you say something useful for somebody's classroom, however it might play out? And in the case of the Lee Group's book, I was just sort of given permission to carry out my vision of this weird course, which became a little less weird as I went on, not because I was getting less weird, but other people started to share my weirdness. So I think that was that breadth of vision of what a mathematics textbook can be was really important to me. In the case of the AMS, I think of the Student Mathematical Library as a series that has that breadth of vision built into it. Things that can be for self-study or go off on tangents. So that was another very natural home, although I particularly wanted to mention in the process, in the case of the Different Sets book, it didn't have that extensive use in the classroom to help shape it and eliminate things that didn't belong and add things that were needed. So the reviewing process became even more important. And in addition to reviewers, one of whom in particular gave incredibly detailed and helpful comments, Ina Mehta, who was the person we were dealing with, was a wonderful blend of encouraging and she had that kind of big picture advice. Our book was at risk of becoming 3 books, and she kept encouraging us to make it 1 book and helped us find ways to do that. So that was particularly valuable. We didn't have the extensive graphics needs that Marty and Ann have alluded to, which is probably a deficiency of our books, but there was terrific support just on the teching and having stuff look good on the page. Both our MAA experience, I'm glad you mentioned Beverly, and our AMS experience. People were enormously supportive and helpful.
Thank you. Before I go on to the next prepared question, I just want to remind everybody remind the attendees that there's a question and answer window, a box that you should see. So please enter your questions. We have a few already. And after this question that I'm about to pose to the panelists, we will be getting to those questions. Okay, so starting with Marty, I just want to ask about, the feedback, the sort of aftermath of writing your book. What was it like? What kind of, is there anything surprising? What was rewarding about it, perhaps? And what kind of advice do you have for people thinking about writing a book?
Yeah, so I think that afterwards, I was really happy to hear from random mathematicians and readers and students from all over. And I'm not at sort of a level of seniority where I receive 100 proofs of the Riemann hypothesis in my spam every day or anything like that. So this was kind of like a positive way of receiving lots of math emails kind of out of the blue and just kind of get in touch with what people were doing. And I tried to kind of maintain some activity on social media. So the book has like a Facebook group and a web page that I put together for it. The main purpose I see for the web page is for errata. So those started coming in pretty quickly, and it's just, of course, that's the first thing I did when I received my copies. I looked, it's like, okay, where are my typos? Then on page one, it's like, oh, there's a typo on page one. So it's, the word red is replaced by myred, M-Y-R-E-D, R-E-D on the first page. And I can tell you why. It's because I used myred for a specific shade of red throughout the book, the code \myred. And I realized that some dots had been put in the wrong color red. So I changed it to myred, but I accidentally changed the word red to myred in the text. Anyways, this is the sort of like finishing touches where it's like, I should go through word by word after the proofs and then fix these things. So that's the horrifying part, is then you realize that there's a typo on each page afterwards, and they're there in print and they'll be there forever in this edition at least. But mostly I like getting the feedback, and then at least before pandemic time, I was pretty quick at replying to emails when people had questions about things, or when people want to know more about how to teach with the book. I like to talk to people about pedagogy, because I don't think that a textbook can really, I don't think it replaces a teacher, and everybody's got their own style. So it's interesting to talk to people about how they might integrate this kind of book and this material with the style of text that this is. So that's been a really interesting experience, talking with people about how they teach number theory and how it might fit with something that's definitely, I mean, I've written it for myself and for the way that I teach. So there's only so much I can do to advise people, but I can at least hear about other people and what they're doing. Yeah, it's been great. I can think of, I mean, I've talked to the AMS a little bit about, possible second editions and things like that, because now that it's been through this kind of process of getting lots of feedback, I can think of minor changes and some things that I would want to add and change. And I don't really want to give it up exactly. So.
Do you ever think about a part two, a next?
I've thought about adding a chapter. That's as far as I've gotten. But besides that, maybe another book project or two in the future. After pandemic and after a toddler is off to school or something.
Yeah. Thank you. Anne, what was the feedback like after you wrote your book, and what advice do you have for prospective authors?
I want to say that that the publicity that was given my book was outstanding. I got things in Siam News, I got things in the MAA journals and the AMS journals, and I got reviews there that were really nice. And I think Steve had a lot to do with that maybe, but that was nice to get, and I think it helped sell the book, which was a good idea too. But I would also like to support what Marty said about the web page. That's a really nice thing to have. I don't know if all of the people who read the textbooks are aware of that, but you can click and go to a web page that the author of the book puts extra material on. And I have found it's a place to put new problems, research type problems for the undergraduates up so that they can, use them freely and do something with them. That's a really nice thing. Let's see, I think that's about all I had to say about that. Yeah,
Thanks.
I think writing with the AMS MAA is great.
Thank you. Harriet, you have, your books are also sort of not standard textbooks, and but they, I think there was a lot of interest, especially we've seen that in the student math library, of books that to give to those undergraduates that want to go further in their studies while they're still undergraduates. What was your feedback like, and did you find that to be true?
Well, one of the most fun forms of feedback was when Emily and I were writing the Different Set book. Different Set, even a mathematician's reaction would be, huh? What is it? Why should I care? And the original introduction we wrote was hung on a piece of history and the mathematician who in 1938 first wrote a paper where he introduced this notion of a different set. And the thing that's striking was that that was really a geometry paper, although the definition is combinatorial and group theoretic. So that was going to be our hook. And then we had a student kind of test read the introduction, and who's this guy Singer? Why should I care about him? It really left her cold. So we downplayed it. Well, this is a long-winded way of saying a former student of Singer wrote to us how pleased he was to see how much attention we gave to Singer's role in the development. So it just gladdened our hearts. I can't tell you how much. In the case of the Lee Group's book, sometimes I heard from people I didn't know who had used it with students and had questions or suggestions. Sometimes I heard from people I do know who had used it, and Bill Barker was even nice enough to invite me to come be a guest star when he used it in his class. But the most fun is several times with the Lee Group's book, I've gotten email from people who are not in academia. They've heard of Lee Groups and wondered what they were and found everything else they picked up too scary, or that kind of story. Engineers, people working, a guy who was a chemist. And that was just incredibly gratifying to sort of have an outreach I hadn't really imagined. And I think it again speaks to what publishing with the professional associations makes possible. I think there's a kind of credibility that that label gives that maybe might draw somebody in who wasn't already a member of the family.
Thank you. Michael, I'll give you the same question. Feedback and advice to other authors.
Sure. Yeah, I certainly, I wanted to say just a couple quick things. One is, Steve, we've got to work on our social media presence, which I have none of my personal.
I don't either. Yeah.
The other thing is that I have no tech skill or interest. And I found, of course, my co-authors took a lot of the slack of that up. but also the MAA and AMS made it possible for a person for whom that is not your interest to still do the job and get a good product. So I definitely appreciate that. I wanted to say that one of the ancillary things that we had, people talked about having this authors page, is that we have an instructor's resource for a couple of the books or all the books that I have, where the instructor can come and actually, for example, includes the proofs of some of the theorems in number theory for those authors who may not want to figure them out on their own. But I wanted to end with encouraging people to write books. I don't know if you've ever been sucked into YouTube, where you just sit there on YouTube and you start listening to things or watching things. So I did this just this morning. I was looking at Lang Lang, this incredible pianist. And I started listening to Lang Lang playing Bach. I love Bach. I try to play Bach and not like he plays it. And one thing that I found is a little YouTube thing of him playing about the simplest piece, in fact, several incredibly simple Bach pieces. And he talked about them and then played them so beautifully. And to me, that was a metaphor for saying, you know, making this mathematical ideas your own, and then somehow expressing them and having the joy of having your own interpretation and your own appreciation of the depth and the meaning for you, and allowing you to express that in a book is something that really can add satisfaction, I think, to one's professional life. So I really encourage it, whether in my case, a lot of motivation is on the teaching side, that I really hope to change people's lives through their learning how to think better for themselves, but also the beauty of the mathematics. So to me, this is an opportunity, and I think that the book programs from the AMS and the MAA are wonderful vehicles for encouraging a depth of appreciation of your own professional experience.
Thank you. So with those beautiful words, we finished the first portion and we have some time for questions. Steve, do you want to start with one? Okay,
He's frozen.
He's frozen. There was a question about at what stage did you approach, or were some of you were approached
actually,
by? Oh, sorry, Steve.
Am I unfrozen now?
Yeah, now you're unfrozen. Somewhat.
Sorry. One for the panel. I'd just like to say that some people are trying to raise their hand to be called on, and we do not have the technical ability to call on attendees. You have to type your questions in the Q&A window. So please do that. There are a couple of people.
Well, let me just interrupt. Sorry, Steve. I did see several people asked, when do you decide to approach a publisher or say, can you look at this? Is it when it's absolutely complete, when your book is absolutely complete, which I know the answer is no. I mean, it can be, but it's
People have asked at what stage.
And yeah, so what stage is the book in usually when a person submits? So maybe Michael, could you start with that?
Yes, so I've had experience of both ways. The very first book we wrote a couple of sample chapters. This was not with the MAA, and we wrote a couple of chapters and sent it in. That was bought by Springer. But for the subsequent books that I've written, we have written the entire book completely and then submitted a really complete manuscript. But one can do it either way, and so there's a variety.
Yeah, I would say there are a lot of answers to this. There are a lot of different authors have done different things. I'm just going to try to cover as many questions as possible. Another one, and then I'll let Steve. It looks like Steve is back. Here's a question. Were your books recognized as scholarship for tenure, or not just tenure, but how does it relate to your advancement in your career, would you say? Harriet?
Oh,
You answer that?
well, in my case, I already had tenure before either one of them. And at my institution, Mount Holyoke College is a liberal arts college with a high emphasis on teaching, but also on independent scholarship and research. Serious writing gets credit for sure, although we also have always had a research expectation. So it was part of the picture. I guess I don't know what the answer would be, whether it could be the total event, but well, maybe I do. Yes, it could. I think it could.
Marty, you're at a research university. What would you say is the level of support and encouragement to write books in your institution?
I mean, not to be too negative about it, but I don't think that there's so much. I'm kind of also a little bit of a strange case because so I went on leave for 3 years from UC Santa Cruz, and I helped start up Yale and US College, which is a new liberal arts college in Singapore. So I sort of straddle liberal arts and research institutions in my experience, in my sort of personal taste. I didn't really think about publishing the book until after I had tenure, which was 2012. And so I think I contacted the AMS probably in 2015, 2016 or something for the publication in 2017. So for me, getting tenure at UC Santa Cruz was really based on research. I mean, I think that the department, you know, they kind of know me. It's a small department, and so they appreciate the contributions. But I think that from a getting tenure standpoint, it wouldn't have been enough by itself. Whereas at Yale and US College, I think, you know, then I was kind of at the associate level, and probably for going up for full, if I were still there, I think it would definitely be considered as a professional achievement and contribute heavily to advancing in the ranks.
Thank you. Steve, do you want to continue?
Yeah.
By the way, let me just make one comment, which is I'm at the University of Texas at Austin, which is a research institution. Yeah. And I think that it would be healthy for our profession to encourage more recognition for this kind of activity than is currently done at research institutions. And so I think part of the goal, you know, all of us we're the ones who create our world. Mm-hmm. And part of it is to influence our own professions to give more importance to this, because it changes how people view the profession.
Absolutely. I completely agree. If I could just say about, in response to the people who are asking when to approach the MAA or the AMS, anytime. We're happy to talk to anybody at any time, from the stage of vague idea to complete polished manuscript. And we're easy to find. Just go to the AMS webpage and look under the book program. There are 4 acquisitions editors, and all of whose names have been mentioned today. As people having good experiences with them, you can talk to any one of us at any time about any book project that you think you'd like to talk about. There is an interesting question here from anonymous attendee that's pointed at Harriet, although I think actually many of you might have something to say about it. So, but I'll start with Harriet, and then the rest of you can chime in if you want to. It's anonymous attendee at 133, if that helps you, Harriet. But basically, the point of the question is that many of you, in particular you, Harriet, but almost all of you have talked about how active learning is incorporated in your teaching. But reading a book is essentially a passive activity. And so do you have advice for somebody who recognizes the importance of active learning, how to incorporate it in a book? And do you have any advice for that person? And did you receive any advice along the way that helped you achieve that? Because your book actually, all of your books actually do achieve that.
In the case of the Lee Group's book, it's a skinny book and it has questions, not answers. Mm-hmm. So the book more nearly recapitulates my goal of pulling it out of the reader rather than doling it out. That's less true of the Different Sets book, but there are exercises, and Emily and I, in some cases, struggled with some of the literature we were drawing on for background and beat it into submission to satisfy our own need to understand. And we did try to retain that in the, not the blood, but.
Mike, Marty, Anne, does any of you want to talk about the contrast between active learning and the passivity of reading and how to bridge that? Anne?
Yeah, I tried to include a lot of exercises that were research type, undergraduate research type exercises, so that if a teacher wanted to, they could use these to get groups of students together to work on. And I hope that those are actually being used.
Yeah. So let me just say, I mean, in my case, the entire, there are no exercises because the entire book is just theorem statements and exercises. So there's with some paragraphs in between that sort of set the context. So there's no passivity if you're trying to deal with these books, because you have to, you're simply required to fill in the actual proofs. Now what the truth is that the statements are organized in such a way that they really present outlines, so to speak, of the proofs. So they're leading a student. But on the other hand, you got to be active in order to engage with the book.
That's the art of an IBL book. Marty had his hand up and we're running out of time, so I'll give you a minute, Marty.
Yeah, just want to say, I think that there are multiple possibilities. I mean, so I really like some of the IBL style books. And I mean, personally, I think I grew the most mathematically going through all the exercises in a T.A. McDonald in some class. This is kind of a classic short text and commutative algebra that I suffered through. And it was a very good experience on that kind of minimalist front. But I'd like to push back on this idea that reading is a passive activity. Right. And I said partly because my wife is a historian. And so I think about what a scholarly book looks like and what somebody who's a history major reads as a junior or senior versus what somebody as a math major reads as a junior or senior. And I think we can change our expectations of what we expect students to read. And part of our responsibility in doing that is to write things that are really accessible, but scholarly, fundamentally scholarly writings. So like I write a little 2-page history section in each chapter, and it's not a Wikipedia blurb. I like did that little bit of research and try to write something that was accurate in terms of modern scholarship, because I want students to actually read at that level. Hopefully they're college students and they're reading that level for other fields. So I think we should expect them to read at that level in math classes too.
And teach them to read that way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to get shut off any second now. So I just wanted to thank all 4 of you for this. This was incredibly useful for me to hear you talk about your books. And I'm certain, to address something Marty just said, no one has ever suffered through your books. I've read all 4 of them, all 6 of them. They were all a joy to read, and I recommend them to everybody watching. Thank you all for coming. Have a lovely rest of the meeting.
Thank you very much. And for the questions we haven't answered, we'll try to answer them by the chat, what we can. And otherwise, please feel free to send us an email with your questions if you have any more.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, you guys.
Really
Great.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yes,
Yeah, it's fun.